Thank you. Small correction, Gaetano. Derby is in Kentucky. Derby is in UK. Good. Pilots talking to a bunch of engineers. I feel like Daniel in the lion's den. What I'd like to do is just work through these sorts of topics. I want to start by just giving a bit of an overview of where the authority is in terms of its sort of strategic framework, because that really underpins everything that the authority does and ultimately cascades down to all of industry. Then I want to talk a little bit around where we are currently in terms of moving forward to becoming what we term a modern regulator. We're moving away from tick boxes and we're moving towards something that is much, much more risk-based. I thought then I'd change themes a bit. You're all delegated design holders, and just wanted to touch a little bit around delegations and the responsibilities that they carry, because they are quite specific. And I think it's useful to talk through some of that, not only in your particular case, but the range of delegations that we actually utilise, particularly externally. I then want to touch on something that I've heard talked about already, and that is emerging technology. It's one of the big challenges that we face, and I want to cover that specifically. It's a shame, unfortunately, that James hasn't yet made it, because I think that piece would be a natural follow-on to what he is going to talk about. So I do hope James makes it, and I do hope he talks around his topic of DDHs and emerging tech, because I am going to touch on that topic, and I'd just like to say I got in first. So hopefully there'll be some common themes between what I'm about to say and what James is about to talk about as well. And then finally, just a couple of challenges, and then we'll round off with some questions. I don't know if you can read that, but I just want to talk. This is the authority's strategic framework. This is published. The public can read it. If you're having trouble sleeping at night, I can recommend it. There's a few things I just want to concentrate on in this particular diagram. And the first is on the right, and it's actually our vision and purpose, because actually that underpins everything that we do. Notice it doesn't really talk about organisations or pilots. It actually refers much more generally to safety. And safety who? Actually, safety of the travelling public, the people who utilise aviation. And there's two aspects to that. Yes, as a regulator, we set standards such that we have a really good measure of confidence that people are going to be safe. But look at that second piece. They feel safe. Interesting perception, isn't it? And if you look at the travelling public, most of them don't even think about the regulation that underpins it. But it's been really interesting that we've had a survey recently, and we do survey the travelling public, is that domestically, 85-90% of people say that flying domestically, they feel safe. They can't really explain why. They don't know, but they intuitively know that there is a layer of protection going on that ensures that when they go from Auckland to Wellington, they're going to arrive in one piece. So that is really important, and it guides everything that we do. The next three elements I want to look at are if you like, our pathways to achieving that mission. The first of them is what we term leadership and influence, really quite high-level stuff. This is actually not even necessarily a regulatory process, but it's something whereby we actually act as a leader, a sponsor for the industry with high-level political, with the minister, with the ministries. Where ministries have ideas about aviation, we can step in and provide some leadership around that. Internationally as well, a lot of conversations I've heard already about MOUs and bilaterals. So we take a really important lead and influence around that. The second area is this active regulatory stewardship. We have this role as the gardener who looks after the garden that is aviation. We have to decide what fertilizer to put on. We have to make decisions around what to plant and when. We have to make decisions around what the rules are and how we adjust as aviation technology changes and moves on. So that is a really, really important role that ensures that we keep the rules, the regulations and everything else fit for purpose. That's a challenge, of course. And I'm happy to talk about the rules process perhaps in questions if anybody wants to go into a bit more detail. Finally, of course, professional regulatory practice. The certification processes, the renewals, the monitoring, the inspections, the licensing, and all of that activity, investigations, safety investigation, all falls into that bucket. It is very much the BAU business that actually ensures that at the working level, aviation is meeting the required standards. And if you move to the very left, you'll see our values. Now, these fell out of the cultural review, which the authority went through 2-3 years ago now. And the point I'll make about that, they are not just internal values. They are values that we try to apply in all of our engagements with industry, with you, with anybody we engage in. So that is what you should see in terms of your engagement with the authority. So what in effect does that mean? Well, it describes our role, it describes our purpose, it really underpins the functions that we do and how we plan to do them and how we build success from that. It is that important guiding thing as to how the authority really achieves its aspirations. And its aspirations are really to become an intelligence-led, risk-based regulator. Because this, let's face it, we all are in the same position of having finite resource. So in a big, wide industry, we have to be able to identify risks so we can actually concentrate our resources into areas that deliver the best safety outcomes. And I'll touch a little bit more on that when I talk about modern regulator in just a second. And being intelligence-led, intelligence-informed, allows us to make decisions around risks. Those could be a sector risk, could be industry-wide, it could be organisational, it could be right down to an individual. And from that, we can then decide what action needs to be taken. Do we need to go out and talk to the sector, helicopter sector, for example? Do we need to do some monitoring and inspection work? Do we need to actually go out and intervene, do a very specific program? At a lower level, recreational, is there an education program we need to push out there? What is the engagement we need to do? But we can target much more effectively if we know what the risks are, and we can prioritise those risks as well, particularly when we have resource constraints. Okay, being a modern regulator. I've mentioned intelligence-led and risk-based. What are we trying to do here? We are trying to move from that we arrive with a form and we look around your organisation and we go, yes, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good. Fantastic. Another 5 years, here you go, here's your certificate. What have we achieved with that? Have we actually looked at what your risks are, how you're managing them? No, we haven't. So from a risk perspective, which is the most effective approach? So we're not throwing compliance out with the bathwater. Compliance still remains a tool that we can use and will form part of the activities that we need to undertake. But we're moving much more to the focus around risk. And a key element to this has been the rollout of the safety management system. I'm pleased to say that after 6 years, and thank you COVID for delaying it by at least a couple, all organisations have now achieved initial SMS certification. Well done to the team who did it. Well done to the organisations who did it as well, because a tremendous amount of effort on that part, on their part, and I really do acknowledge that. But what next? So we've done that. We've made all these organisations have SMS systems. So what? So the key to us now is, as a modern regulator, if we can use intelligence to identify risk, we can now go out to organisations and say, we've identified this risk across the helicopter sector, whatever it is. Let's talk to you, and it might be at your renewal. Let's look at your safety system. How are you managing this particular risk? Is it a risk for you? It may not be, in which case that's fine, but it may be. Have you identified it? How are you managing it? Oh, that's a really good process. Well done. Or, actually, you haven't picked it up. So, immediately, we have an issue there that we can address from a risk-based perspective with that organisation. So that's an example. And the point being, if we look at the intelligence leading up to that, we can look at an organisation, look at its performance, and actually then, by interrogating the safety system, derive an awful lot of assurance about how that company is managing its own business in terms of both its risk, sector risk, right down to an individual level. And that's not just regulatory risk, operational risk, it also includes things like Haswell as well, increasingly. If we get that assurance, then we should be able to go in with a lighter touch to those organisations. Now, those organisations that clearly are underperforming, we will have to put more effort in because there is more effort required to manage that specific risk. But the aim being, you can hopefully see, is we concentrate our resource where the risk is most prevalent and ensure it is identified and tracked and mitigated. To take this forward, it's an evolutionary, iterative process. It's not, I can't say, December the 31st this year, we are going to be a modern regulator. There's an awful lot of work to be done around the policy to support this, the actual mechanisms, training for our people on the new approach. We need to really get them thinking in really quite a different way. Systems thinking, critical thinking. All of those aspects that are required to make these new sorts of decisions. No longer the comfort of completing a set of ticks. You actually have to go out and think about what you're doing. And most importantly, we have to engage with the industry, because actually the industry needs to know what to expect when we go out, how we're going to conduct the audit so they are prepared. And so a big chunk of this is making sure that industry understand how this process works and where we're actually coming from. So that's modern regulator. I'll move on now just to talk a little bit about delegations. What is a delegation? Well, the Act, the Civil Aviation Act, is very clear. It subscribes particular responsibilities for the director to undertake certain activities. Now, the director, absolutely impossible for one individual to exercise all of those powers that they have. Hence, it is necessary for the director to delegate a lot of those responsibilities and powers. Now, internally, within the CAA, certainly all the inspectors here will hold various levels of delegations for things that they can exercise and do on behalf of the director. But we also utilise it externally as well. And you are, the majority of you, a case in point. You are certified under Part 146, but then you have the delegated responsibility as a design holder. You can, on behalf of the director, certify certain things and approve them. Big responsibility. And that would be one of the points I make to all delegate holders, particularly external ones, is you carry the power of the director in that delegation. and it's something to bear in mind and remember. We have other examples. It's not just you. An example would be we contract out all of our, well, not all, but the majority of our flight examining and flight testing for ground subjects. We have one contract, and that contract, the company, well, in fact, the boss of the company, the CAA, holds the delegation to conduct that specific activity. We issue delegates to some flight examiners under contract. We delegate to Part 149 organisations. Part 149 are the recreational aviation setups. So they basically oversee microlight, gliding, hang gliding, parachuting. So they are certified to issue qualification certificates and training syllabuses under the certificate, and they are delegated the director's responsibility to actually issue those aviation documents, the certificates that they issue. Now, one of the interesting things around this actually is oversight. So we've delegated. Does that mean we can just go away and forget all about you and assume you're all doing a fantastically good job? Well, you'd probably all like to say yes, please. I have to come back and say, well, yes, up to a point. So there has to be some oversight. Now, it's relatively easy for your organisation because you are certified. So actually there's a process of renewal and monitoring that goes with that. The same is true actually of the Part 149 organisations, although we're actually undertaking a restock of how we deal with those organisations. Interestingly, because to be blunt, the CAA probably has taken its eye off the ball a little bit. We've let those organisations really just get on with their business and just assumed they'll all be fine. And we now need to rebuild that relationship and pull back a little bit and provide a bit more oversight. At the contract level, and I mentioned the contract for the flight testing, we have monthly meetings over the contract. We deal regularly with the organisation. So we have that level of oversight that delegations are being done. So I guess the message is we are obviously interested. We don't try to be overbearing. We obviously trust you. You go through a fairly extensive process to get that delegation. So there is a level of trust, but don't think because we apply still some oversight that we don't trust you. We have to do that really as part of our regulatory process. Around delegation, it's a topic I'll come on to when I go on to emerging technology, that there is pressure, and from industry as well, as can we delegate more? Can we let industry do more to control itself? And I'll go back to June of this year, and I was at the FAA EASA Safety Conference in Washington, and the issue of sort of emerging technology cropped up, and the president of the American Aircraft Manufacturers Association was talking, and we were talking about safety standards generally, and he stood up and said, "Don't you worry, the Aircraft Manufacturers Association will take care of all the safety issues for you. I can assure you that of the FAA inspectors there who'd been sadly bitten by the Boeing 737 MAX issue, almost fainted on the spot." So there is a tension between letting industry look after itself and the proper regulatory functions of the authorities. And we acknowledge that tension, and we try to manage that as carefully as possible. That leads quite nicely into emerging technology. So emerging technology, I suppose really for about 100 years, aviation has evolved. And if I think about the processes whereby a Boeing 707 was type certified and what was required, and you compare that to a Boeing 787, in principle, the procedures are pretty well similar, aren't they? There are differences, obviously. So it's been an evolutionary process. There have been established procedures, design standards to work from. Emerging technology is disruptive. Emerging technology doesn't necessarily conform to any of those design standards. And so, particularly from a regulatory perspective, it is a challenge because we don't have the comfort of those little blankets of standards to fall back on. The other thing I'll mention about emerging technology is it is more than just drones. If you talk to a lot of people, particularly the public, and you talk emerging technology, they'll go, oh yes, drones. Because they see the estate agents, they see their pizzas being delivered or whatever, and they think that is emerging technology. That is part of emerging technology. Arguably, drones actually are now pretty conventional because we've been dealing with them for quite a while. There are still some issues with them around airspace use and everything else, and they are increasing in size. We need to tackle things like beyond visual control. Yes, there are issues there, but, well, I'll say relatively straightforward in the context of what I'm about to describe next. But it's much more than that. And emerging technology is, in the true sense, emerging technology. We are looking at the Dawn Aerospaces, and James, I'm sure, will talk about this, where he's trying to launch effectively conventional aeroplanes into space to deliver and then come back conventionally. Kia, long duration autonomous operations for weeks, months at a time to provide surveillance, communications, etc. Genuinely pushing the boundaries of technology. And there's two aspects to that. One is a lot of the people involved in that technology are not necessarily involved in aviation, and so they're not aware of some of the safety processes that we have to go through to ensure that the product is safe. And also that they are the type of people that just want to get things done. And that's fantastic. But of course, we have a process, as you will all know, processes to go through. They feel that slows them down. We feel it's necessary, of course, because we have safety at the uppermost part of our mind. So there is the high-tech end, but also, and I'll mention the word decarbonisation here, it is synthetic aviation fuel. It is hybrid power systems, it is electric power systems, it's hydrogen, it's autonomous, it's the eVTOL. There is a plethora of emerging technology out there that needs to be dealt with. To my mind, it sort of falls into two brackets. To me, there is emerging technology, which I will term falls into sort of generic use. So hybrid airliners are sort of, they're a continuum from where we are now, just into a different propulsion system. There are rules that govern that. Now, the challenge for us is how do we need to adapt those rules, or what extra rules do we need to take into account where, let's say there's a 30-minute duration reserve requirement. Pretty easy to do when you've got petrol or Jet A1. How do we as a regulator measure that when it's a battery? So these are some of the challenges that we need to do. The second element I would term specific use, and it is the sort of one-offs. It's the Dawn's very specific activity, the Kia's very specific activity. So how do we develop our processes to do that? The point I'll make about this as well is there is no international agreement here about the way ahead. I can assure you that when I was in Washington, we sat down with FAA, EASA, Australia, Singapore, Transport Canada, and we were all asking the same questions of each other. How are you going to do it? And we were all keen to know how everybody else was going to do it, because then we could do it the same way. But nobody had the answer. So there is no solution on the table at the moment. For New Zealand, we are typically followers. We don't really have the resource to go developing internal standards and everything else. And the issue is as well, a lot of these companies need international standards. They don't just want to operate in New Zealand, they want to take their products around the world. So to us, it makes a lot of sense that we follow compliance with the likes of the FAA and the OSA in particular. So we are, and this comes back to our leadership role, I suppose, we are engaging with 4 or 5 of the international authorities to try and work out what direction we should take in terms of the regulation of emerging technology. But we're not there yet, and there's a journey to go on. So how do we move forward? And I particularly want to look at the more technically demanding aspects of emerging technology, the Dawns, the Kias, and things like that. The first thing is, as I've said already, there are no real standards, certification, development standards that really cover these aeroplanes. Or in fact, many of them not even aeroplanes. these platforms, I'll call them that. So one of the things we have been thinking about, and we have been talking to industry about this, and in actual fact, we've got a meeting in a couple of weeks to try and nut some of this out and whiteboard how we can take this forward, is actually to separate the development into a different sort of structure. So we have the emerging tech company. We have the proposal around some form of design authority that will pull together resource and provide advice to perhaps a range of companies. Because one of the issues we have here is there is not a plethora and a tree load of software designers, human factors experts, computer designers. We're scrabbling for them, industry is scrabbling for them, we get one, industry pay them more and they take them off us. So that is one of the really big challenges. So how do we build a nucleus of competency and knowledge that can support both the company and to a degree as well, the CAA? So if you can develop that design organisation, and it would be, we don't know yet quite what it's going to be, but it will be built around some sort of experimental / single-use, special-use vehicle. And the aim would be to, through a staged process, work from a design to a fully compliant product. How do we do that? Staged approach. Start with a quarter scale. Test out the quarter scale, test out your systems, test out your autopilots, and then when you get to that point, there's a review. Are we content? Right, now, approval granted, move on to the next stage. And everybody is happy. Alongside that as well, you need to develop the operational aspects. So the concept would be the vehicle, and then the concept of operations alongside. How are we going to work through the airspace issues? What are those issues? At the end of that process, you then have a package that can be put forward for certification. Certification probably under Part 102, performance-based rule. That is the sort of package we would be looking to see. To facilitate that, we are gradually starting to grow an emerging tech unit within the CAA, whose role will be collaborative. It will collaborate with that design authority, with the emerging tech companies, to facilitate that process. And so the CAA, to a degree, will be involved in that process and provide some confidence at that end solution that we can go into a certification process. Certification is done independently because that is still a requirement. But the hard work's been done, and at that point, the certification should be relatively straightforward. That's the idea. James, I'm sure, might touch on that. I know we've had some discussions with Sean at Merlin, and it is an idea only at this stage. It is quite radical. Some of my engineers will find it quite challenging, I think, in terms of how do we develop this sort of experimental special use certification process. But we've got to come up with something different to drive this all forward. And don't get me started on artificial intelligence, because nobody has a clue, I can assure you, over how we even begin to certify, standardize an artificial intelligence. So it was the great disruptor himself, Elon Musk, who said artificial intelligence is not to be trusted. Well, there's from the horse's mouth, so maybe that's a warning we should listen to. But it is coming. It's just nobody really has any concept of how we even approach this thing at the moment. So there's a challenge. And I'm just going to finish off with a couple of other challenges that we're working through. You will all be aware of COVID, of course, and the pandemic. Are we in it still? Don't know. My point is, and I make this regularly, is getting into COVID was actually relatively straightforward compared to getting out of it. So we have demand from people wanting to travel now, which is far, far outstripping even the most optimistic of predictions when we were in the middle of COVID. People want to travel. Unfortunately, the ability of industry to respond is at a much lower level. It takes time to recruit pilots and aeroplanes and get the maintenance done, baggage handlers. They're just not enough people. Supply chain issues. We all know the problems. So that is a real challenge for us at the moment, as much as it is for the industry, and it's how we regulate that safely. So we're working very, very closely with industry. And the second one is resource. We're all fighting for the same technical experts. I just mentioned that. And that is a challenge, getting the right people in the right roles. It's recruiting them in a timely fashion. And we are resource limited. And we've had to go out to industry to explain that we can only do so much with the resource that we currently have. We are looking to address that. We have funding bids and funding reviews in train at the moment. We will, of course, be in the lap of our political masters, of course, as to what we achieve with that. What I would finish off by saying is thank you very much for the work that you all do in support of the aviation industry. It does keep it functioning in a safe manner. So certainly from me, appreciate really the work you do, and thank you very much.